Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm back out here at the Lake Wilson Reservoir in Oahu, and in this video I'm going to be testing the Bixpy J2 versus a DIY motor setup that I put together. To do this test I have my Pelican Catch 110 HD with the pedal drive system. So I'm going to be using the Bixpy through-hole adapter, and I'm going to be using a through-hole setup that I made myself. In this video, I'm going to be comparing 5 things about these two setups. I'm going to do price, ease of use, weight, top speed, and reasonable max distance. That being, at the most efficient speed for each motor, how long can it run and how far will that actually get you? For the how long will it run at the best speed test, I'm going to be doing that one off the water. I'm gonna have a setup for that so I can run both motors at the same time and see which one lasts longer, and then whichever one lasts longer and has a further theoretical difference, I'm then going to take the kayak out with that motor and actually do a run to see how far I could really get and if the numbers line up with the off the water test. But to measure the top speed and the speed at different settings, I have my Garmin Striker 4 on maps right now so I can see how fast I'm going. Before I get going on these speed tests, I'm going to jump off the water real quick so I could show you the weight and how easy it is to set all this stuff up and do a quick off-water comparison of the two systems. Okay, so before we get started on all of the on-the-water tests, let's talk about weight and ease of use. So right off the bat, I'm gonna say that the Bixpy is the clear winner for ease of use. If you look at the battery, right here on the back of the battery box is 3 port. This one is for charging the battery, this one is for accessories, but you do have to buy that cable separate from the Bixpy system. And this one plugs the motor in. It's as easy as just plugging the motor in, making sure that you have the kill switch on the little power button right there, using your remote control that comes with it to set your speed. Another thing that makes the Bixpy really easy is if you have one Bixpy motor but multiple kayaks that you are trying to use it with, you can get the different mounting adapters from Bixpy. This piece right here just unbolts and you could bolt it onto the new mounting adapter. When I first got this motor, I got it for the kayak that we're testing it on today. So I bought it with the through-hole adapter that just slips in where the pedal drive would normally sit, but Bixpy does sell a transom mount adapter and it's about $170 on their website. So what I did was just take the top half of the shaft that I cut down for my DIY motor project that we're testing today and just used that to attach the motor to it. But with no DIY involved, you can get an actual Bixpy transom mount adapter. To move the motor from a kayak with a transom mount to the through-hole adapter, undo these quick release zip ties that I put on here to keep the cable in place. Then once you have the cable undone, get a wrench and a screwdriver and then just undo this piece here. Now you can pop this shaft off and replace it with this one. Just like I had it on the other shaft, reusable zip ties. I just have a little tab right here that lets them or releases them. And just that quick, your Bixpy motor is now set up for a through hole. Now let's talk about the DIY setup. So Bixpy sells everything you need to make this work. DIY, you have to make it yourself. This through-hole adapter that I made, I 3D printed. My measurements weren't exactly perfect, but PLA is a pretty soft material, so I was able to hit it with a heat gun and then just kind of mold it into shape as I shoved it through the hole a few times. But to do this, I had to cut the shaft to length, that way I don't have a giant motor head sticking up in the middle of my kayak. Then I had to seal the top of the shaft so no water gets in there. Quick release connectors, seen this in several of my videos. Just connects to the battery. But for this, while Bixpy has one cable, you have to have a minimum of 2 cables. The battery connection cables and the ones that go to the motor. So it's kind of a lot of cabling. I don't really like the way it looks on the kayak, and it just requires a little bit more setup and plug in when you get out there on the water. There is no safety switch in this setup. I'm sure you could set up a safety switch to where it works for you, but I didn't do that because mostly I'm lazy, but also I didn't really feel like figuring that out right now. Another thing about the DIY setup is, as you can see, I have two motors here. Once I have it set up for the through-hole motor, I can't undo that if I want to put it on a transom mount kayak. So I have this one set up on the transom mount. Also, if you watched my last video, this is the motor that was set up on the 18-volt system, and I just had to replace a couple wires on it, and now it works again. The DIY requires multiple motors if you want it to be used on multiple kayaks, or rather, if you want it to be used on multiple different mounting types. It requires an external motor controller and a battery. The Bixpy kit comes with the battery and motor. The motor controller is built in within the battery, and the mounting adapter, while it is sold separately, it's basically just a plug-and-play kit once you get everything. So the Bixpy is easier to use. There's no question about that. But let's talk about price for a second. If you wanted to use the Bixpy on two separate kayaks, you would have to buy a $160 adapter if you don't want to DIY it like I did. So that's $160. This is $130 for the through-hole adapter. And then the Bixpy J2, which they don't sell anymore, they replaced it with the K1. At the time I bought it, it was still a little over $1,000. I think for these two pieces together, I paid $1,300. So you're looking at $1,470 for the Bixpy motor with two different mounting adapters. For this setup over here, you could get this on Amazon for $60. You could get this 50 amp hour lithium battery for $200. A quick note about this Ampertime battery, they're now being sold under the brand Litime, where they're the same battery. They do not have cold charge protection. So if it's lower than 40 degrees, you're gonna have to charge the battery inside to avoid damaging the cells within it. Other than that, it's a $200 battery. It's a great setup. I've been using this one for 1.5 years with no issues. Granted, I'm in Hawaii, so it does not get cold, and it doesn't really get that hot, so I could use this battery pretty much year-round without it ever worrying about it. But it does have a high temperature protection in it, so if you're pretty much anywhere in the mainland, just don't try to charge your battery when it's freezing. Other than that, it'll work for you. These batteries have great reviews. Tons of people have tested them on YouTube. Go check it out. I strongly suggest this brand if you're trying to get a good lithium battery without spending $1,000. Moving on, so these motors, you can get a transom mount water snake T24 like this one here for $130 on Amazon. So the trolling motor itself is cheaper than the transom mount adapter for the Bixpy. I 3D printed this piece, so there's not really a price on it. You don't have to 3D print your adapter. You could make it out of construction foam board, like the pink insulation stuff. You can even make these out of wood. There's a million ways you can make your through-hole adapter. Just for the sake of putting a price on it, we'll say that if you were to go to Home Depot and buy materials to make one, we'll call it a generous $50. So for this setup here, we've got 260 in motors, plus the motor controller, that's $320, plus the battery is $520, and all of the DIY material you can need coming in at, we'll say $80 in DIY material, so you could get creative with how you want to build this. That's $600 for this setup with two motors versus just shy of $1,500 for just the one motor and the two mounting adapters. So the DIY definitely wins in price. Now let's look at weight. How much do these weigh? I'm going to be testing this today, just weighing the configuration that we'll be running them in. The transom mount water snake and the transom mount adapter for the Bixpy, like their price or their weight is basically negligible. It's pretty much the same. So let's start with the water snake, get this on the scale. We'll call that 5.2 pounds. It never actually hit 5.2, but they kept jumping around. All right, the motor controller, oh wow, 2.4. So we're up to 7.6 pounds. Now the battery, $11.2, so 18.8 pounds total. For the DIY kit, let's check out the Bixpy. 7.4 for the battery and 4.5 for the motor, 12 pounds. So the Bixpy is a whole 6.5 pounds lighter. All right, so now let's head back out to the water and check out how fast these things can go. All right, and now that we are back on the water, I'm going to get the Bixpy set up and show you how quick and easy that is to do on the water, and then get the speed test rolling. All right, as you just saw, you're going to take the cord coming off of the motor and plug it into this port right here that has a propeller label on it that is for the motor. So you just undo the cap, plug this in, And I'm not sure if you could see in the cap, but there are 2 notches. Once the blue collar right here is lined up with the notches, it'll slide all the way in and then lock in place. That provides a watertight connection on the battery. Slide the battery up under your seat or wherever you're choosing to store it. I like it being under the seat because it's out of the way. Then you're just gonna put the kill switch on the power button here and slide that under. Slip this around your wrist. All right, so after you got the battery tucked up under your seat and you got your kill switch on your wrist, you're just going to pop the motor into the slot where the pedal drive goes, and then use the locking tabs to hold the motor in place. So you can see with the Bixpy motor installed, it frees up the entire deck, so it doesn't really get in the way at all. There is this cord that runs out under the seat, but one cord isn't really that big of a deal. To control it, you have the remote. To go forward, you press the forward button. There are 12 forward speeds, so whatever speed you want it to go to, that's how many times you press the button. There's a stop button to stop the motor, and there's the reverse button to go backwards. There are 3 reverse speeds, and if you're going forwards and you want to slow down, just press the reverse button however many times you want to slow down. And for steering, this kayak has a rudder and this rudder lever right here. So I'm going to be testing this using the GPS on my Garmin to track the speed. So I'm just going to do this 1 speed at a time. I'm going to press the forward button once, see how fast I get going. And then once the speed settles out, press the button up to the 2nd speed, and so on until we get up to max speed. And then I will show you what the speed curve looks like for the different settings on the motor. On the first setting with the wind at my back, we are picking up a little bit of speed. Looks like we're sitting at 1.5 miles an hour. Let's kick it up to speed 2 real quick. 165, speed 3. Speed 3, we're at about 1.9. Speed 4. Averaging out at 2.1. Let's go up to 5. All right, so we got 2.4. 6. All right, 2.7. Let's go up to speed 7. So 2.8 without the wind at our back, 2.9 with the wind, or 2.9 to 3-ish with the wind at our back. Let's kick it up to speed 8. 3.1 with the wind, roughly 3 without the wind. Now I'm going into the wind right now. Now that I'm not going into the wind, I'm gonna kick it up to speed 9. Speed 9 with no wind is pretty consistently hitting 3.1 miles an hour. So let's hit it up to speed 10. 3.35 with no wind. Small breeze at our back, we hit up to 3.4. Let's kick it up to 11. 3.6 with no wind at our face. Peaks up to about 3.7 with a slight breeze at our back. Let's go max speed. All right, so 3.7 seems to be the fastest that I was able to get it going with the Bixpy. I couldn't seem to get the wind at my back, but with no wind, that was really the test we were going for. So as you can see from the chart, the speed increase isn't exactly linear. There does seem to be a bit of a curve as we get up towards the higher settings on the motor, where it doesn't give us as big of a speed increase per setting we go up. And it is a very small difference between the lower settings and the higher settings as far as actual increase. But if you look at this chart provided by Bixpy, and if you look at the frequently asked questions on their website, you can see that at the max speed, you're only getting 1 hour and 20 minutes runtime out of it. And there have been several videos that confirm that that is an accurate number. But down around speed 6 or 7, you could expect 4 hours, and 10 hours down at speed 1. So with those numbers in mind, the amount of runtime versus actual distance traveled looks like setting 6 or 7 would be the most efficient setting to have this on. And on this particular kayak, you could expect about 10 miles of runtime out of your kayak. Now I'm going to take the Bixpy out and get the DIY setup going on, and I'm going to do the same test and show you guys the controls and everything on that one. So taking the Bixpy apart is as easy as it is putting it together. Take the kill switch off, put this somewhere safe where you're not going to lose it. Take the battery apart. When you take this off, make sure that the cap is dry before you put it on to not damage to not damage the output on the battery. Then just same here, make sure that this cap is dry. And then you're good to go. I'll just slide the battery back under the seat because it's the best place for me to store it on this kayak. Undo your clips, and then the motor pops right out. Grab my motor from behind me and toss the Bixpy back here. You're gonna take the motor, slide it into the hole, take your motor control, plug it into the quick release on the motor, or that's coming out of the motor, and then run your battery cable to the battery and plug that in. Okay, so now you can see I'm at 54% and I'm moving forward. If I want to stop, I just put it in neutral, go backwards, flip the switch to reverse. I can adjust the speed by turning the knob. As you can see here with the DIY setup, there's a motor controller right here that takes up a lot of space. They make smaller ones, but I blew up 2 of the smaller ones and this one has been working really well for me. The motor itself takes up about the same amount of space as the Bixpy motor, and the battery doesn't fit under the seat, so it's up there taking up my forward storage. So this one does take up a bit more space than the Bixpy motor. And there's these 2 wire bundles sticking out that I'm not particularly thrilled about. Anyways, yeah, let's get into the speed test. So at 10%, the motor doesn't actually even turn on. So we're gonna start this test at 20% with the wind at our back. Not even fast enough to fight the wind or stop the wind from turning us. So let's turn it up to 30%. Okay, so at 30%, we're going about 0.8 before the wind started to pick up. So I'm going up to 40%. 1.6 at 40%, which is the first actual usable speed. Let's turn it up to 50%. We're going 1.9 miles an hour, 2 miles an hour. Let's turn it up to 60%. So 2.3, 2.4 at 60%. Kick it up to 70. All right, 2.7. Let's go up to 80%. 2.85, 2.9. Okay, let's turn it up to 90%. 3.1. All right, let's kick this up into full speed. All right, so 3.3, 3.4. Okay, so I peaked at 3.4 miles an hour with the DIY kit, which is about a quarter of a mile an hour or slower than the Bixpy. But what does that mean in a real world application? With an hour 20 runtime on the Bixpy, at max speed we could go about 5 miles. The water snake trolling motor draws 20 amps and I have a 50 amp hour battery, so I should be able to go 2.5 hours at max speed. But let's call it 2 hours and 15 minutes just to not fully drain the lithium battery, and I got up to 3.4 miles an hour with the DIY. So at top speed, even though it was a quarter mile an hour slower, I'll be able to go a little over 7.5 miles at full speed. At top speed, that's an extra 2.5 miles over the Bixpy. So let's cut back over to off the water testing and see how long each of these motors will run at their most efficient speed. For this test, I set both motors up to run in individual buckets of water and have my GoPro on time-lapse mode. To time how long each motor ran for before it died, I did the math based off how long the recording was going when the motor finally stopped. Each second of video on the time-lapse is 15 seconds of real time. So you might have noticed the water snake motor is not the same one that we did the speed test on, and that's because I did not have a way to mount it in the bucket. But this transom mount motor is the same model, and the controller and battery are the same ones I used in the other tests. I also moved the Bixpy motor back to the transom adapter in order to mount it onto the bucket. The settings that the motors are running on is a setting that the tests showed to be the most efficient in terms of power output versus movement speed. For the Bixpy, it is setting 6, since that is where we saw the change in the speed curve during the test, which lines up with the information that Bixpy stated about the motor. For the DIY, I have it set to 65%. If you look at this graph, you can see it has a similar curve as the Bixpy, and 65 seems to be the most efficient setting. So I set this test up and I left my house to go to the movies. When I returned, I found that the Bixpy motor had stopped running. After reviewing the time-lapse footage, the information from Bixpy was pretty much spot on. They stated that you can get 4 hours at setting 6, and it ran for 4 hours and 14 minutes. What really surprised me, though, was that the DIY motor was still running, and at 1 a.m. after nearly 6 hours I stopped the test so I could charge the battery for the real-world test of the DIY setup to see if the motor will really run that long with the resistance of moving a kayak and how far it will take me. Back out at the lake again with the DIY kit. I'm going to set it to 70%, see how far I could go before it completely dies. When the motor dies, I have my pedal drive back there, that way I can get back to the start. But I'm going to be using this app to track the total distance that I went, so I could show you guys that at the end. But anyways, let's get into it. I've got the speed controller set to 70%. Going to start this and get running. One of my complaints about the DIY system from earlier in the video was the clutter. Having the battery up at the front of the kayak and then having all the cables out everywhere. But without the Bixpy in here, I actually had room to have the motor there and the motor controller just sticking out from under the seat with the battery back here behind me. So all the cabling is running under the seat and out of the way, so you just have the one wire just like you do with the Bixpy. And doing it like this, you can see that connector is up off the bottom of the kayak so it can't get wet. And I'm not sure if you saw it back there, but the connector coming out of the battery is also up off of the bottom of the kayak. Neither of my quick connects can get wet now. And while they are advertised as mostly waterproof, it's nice to have that little extra peace of mind that they're not actually going to be touching the water. Just hit 3 miles. Check back in if anything interesting happens or when we hit 5 miles. All right, so it's been 2 hours and just over 4 miles, but I finally made it to that bridge right there. If you look here at the map, I started right here, went down around and came up to the other side of the lake. Yeah, so it's 2 hours and 4 miles to make it to that bridge right there. But I will check back in another mile, let you guys know how it's going. All right, so I just hit 5 miles and I'm gonna turn back around. But so far everything seems to be going well, and I've never seen this part of the lake, so it's been kind of fun. I will check back in with you guys in a couple of miles. All right, so I just hit 10 miles in a little under 5 hours. I'm gonna push it for another hour, see if I could get up to 12 miles out of it. All right, so I just did 12 miles on the kayak and right at about 6 hours running at a trolling speed. The motor ran continuously for just shy of 6 hours and the battery is not dead yet. I just stopped because I figured 12 miles was more than enough. So let's talk about this test overall. The Bixpy is cleaner and it wins the ease of use test. It looks good. It's one cord, you just plug it in. You have a remote that goes forward and back. There's not a lot of room for error there. The Bixpy did win top speed as well. It had a top speed that was about a 1/4 mile an hour faster than the DIY kit on this kayak. And the Bixpy won the weight test by several pounds. Where the DIY kayak won was in cost. As I explained before, the DIY kayak costs 1/3 what the Bixpy cost. And it's really hard to ignore that point. And while you can realistically expect the Bixpy to run for 4 hours at its most efficient speed, the DIY kit has been running for 6 hours without stopping, and it's still not dead yet. The Bixpy won 3 out of the 5 tests, but the 2 tests that the DIY won were a very wide margin. But the Bixpy is still a great setup. Quick, it's easy, it's clean, it looks good, and it's just ready to run as soon as you buy it. But overall, if you're new to kayak fishing or you like doing stuff yourself, like seeing what you can build, personally I think the DIY option might be a little bit better for a lot of people, especially considering it does not have that cost barrier that the Bixpy does. So the Bixpy is the winner as far as it won 3 out of 5 categories that we tested. But I think the DIY kit using the water snake trolling motor is a really strong contender. And if you guys have any questions about how I set up the DIY, just leave a comment down below. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. I will catch you on the next one. Oh, and I'm about to just I have a mile between here and the ramp where I put in. So I'm just gonna run the motor at full speed to get back down there. I'll just put it up on the screen. If running it at full speed, I was able to make it back, which would have been covering 13 miles in a not very efficient kayak with this DIY motor using the 50 amp hour lithium battery.